And the microphone is back on the blade. Hello, and welcome to The Breakdown, where we get into the details around all your favorite books publication. And today, we're going to be jumping into the Cosmere. Created by Brandon Sanderson, the Cosmere is a bit more complicated than your standard sci-fi fantasy universe. This isn't exactly one story or even one world, but instead it's a bunch of different worlds, all within the same fantastical universe. Unlike the MCU, though, you don't see too much overlap between these worlds, and it falls into a more similar treatment to the Stephen King extended universe, where you have occasional character overlap, but more often just references to the other stories going on in this universe, at least as of publication of this video. It could change in the near future, and as you'll see from the frequent output from this author, new information comes quick within the Cosmere. Now, before we can actually break down this series, though, I got a sponsor I need to talk about. Celebrating the fact that the Stormweaver subreddit has hit over 5K in followers, Wraithmark Creative has decided to launch a limited edition Kickstarter campaign that was funded in just under 9 minutes, and that's going to be for these luxurious Stormweaver playmats. Useful to use as more than just a mousepad if you're into D&D or any tabletop gaming. These limited edition playmats feature art by Azir Masoa and are hand-signed by the author Bryce O'Connor. Already with black stitch edges and a non-slip back, there are still plenty of stretch goals to go to make this an even better deal on Kickstarter. But the celebration doesn't end there, because Iron Prince, the first book in the Stormweaver series, is going to be free between now and August 17th on Kindle. So whether you'd like to back the Kickstarter or go ahead and just pick up a free copy of Iron Prince, check the links in the description down below. Now, before we get into the breakdown of the Cosmere, I do think it's important to make note that I found quite a bit of conflicting information about the publication of these books while doing my research online. Word counts seemed to fluctuate and publishers changed hands, but I tried to keep all the information to the first publication if possible. Don't worry, it'll get a lot clearer as we get into it. But with Sanderson recently claiming on his YouTube channel that he expects to as early as next year be on set for live action adaptations of his work, it seems like there's no better time than ever than jump into the Cosmere. Now, the entirety of the Cosmere is the brainchild of Brandon Sanderson, who was born in Lincoln, Nebraska, and currently teaches at Brigham Young University as a professor. But Sanderson's long Cosmere publication history goes back all the way to 2005 with the release of Elantris. Elantris was published by Tor, and it has over 205,000 words in it. You follow multiple POVs, including Prince Rodan, Princess Serene, and Gjorn Hrathen. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to get into POV information for anything that could be considered a sequel book within the Cosmere for spoiler reasons. That being said, though, Elantris takes place in the Cosmere world of Sel, in the city of, you guessed it, Elantris. But what I'll say about Elantris is, well, in terms of its overall narrative complexity, by Sanderson's usual standard, it's considered quite simple. Yet it is still undeniably recognizable as a Sanderson work, containing many of his writing staples, including complex magic systems, a colorful cast of characters, and a somewhat hopeful tone that even in Sanderson's bleakest works tends to permeate his writing. And Elantris already does have a sequel, or at least a follow-up of sorts, with Hope of Elantris, which was put out in 2006. Only 6,840 words long, it's hard to consider this a real entry into the Cosmere, but a lot of entries in the Cosmere are smaller stories that have just kind of been trickled out from Sanderson himself, so I decided to do the extra work for myself and include every single one of them in this video. Fortunately, though, Hope of Elantris is currently available for free on Sanderson's website. You can check it out for yourself. That same year, though, in 2006, Brandon Sanderson put out his probably best-known work, Mistborn, aka The Final Empire. Coming in at 211,959 words, this was also released by Tor, and the main POV follows the character Vin, who turns out is a Mistborn, someone who can use a wide variety of magics, all based in the consumption of metal. This allows Vin to do all sorts of cool things like fly around the city, and even shoot coins like bullets. Now, all Mistborn books, so far at least, God, I love that you can say that, take place in the Cosmere world of Scladrial. Quite famously, Sanderson has stated the conception of this book revolved around the idea of, what if the Dark Lord won? Hence why the main antagonist is the Lord Ruler, an already established victor who has crushed the heroes that have come before and is working as the supreme leader of the society. And that is who Vin is going up against. Mistborn, since its release, has achieved incredible commercial and critical success, which is why you can find copies of it in basically every single bookstore you go in today, usually positioned right next to copies of its sequel, Well of Ascension. Released in 2007, Well of Ascension continues the story of the Final Empire and contains 249,000 words. Also published by Tor, this trilogy was concluded the year after with the release of The Hero of Ages, which contained over 241,000 words, and was, yes, also published published by Tor. With the incredible commercial and critical success of the first Mistborn trilogy, its influence on the genre ever since its release is undeniable, helping usher in the age of harder magic systems we've seen to come dominate so many fantasy series. According to what Sanderson's been saying on his YouTube channel, Mistborn seems to be the most likely candidate for the first ever adaptation in the live-action form for a Cosmere story, and I could not be more excited as a fan. But let's go ahead and enter the next era of Sanderson's writing. Now, in 2009, we were introduced to the Cosmere world Nalfis and the story Warbreaker. Warbreaker actually used to be my favorite Sanderson work to point people at if they were looking for a standalone book to just try out Sanderson's work. But with a sequel announced, I can no longer do that. Of course, Warbreaker was put out by Tor, and it contains over 243,000 words. And the conflict of the story involves a god king that ain't no one want to be marrying. I find it hard to focus too much on Warbreaker at this point, despite it being one of Sanderson's most colorful works, because just around the corner we have The Way of Kings, the first book in the Stormlight Archive, by far Sanderson's most ambitious endeavor yet. A planned 10-book series, it begins with The Way of Kings, which takes place in the Cosmere planet of Roshar. Published, of course, by Tor and containing over 383,000 words, The Way of Kings follows primarily the POV of Kaladin Stormblessed, a warrior fallen from glory on the battlefield who's forced to work in a bridge crew in one of the most horrific environments to fight a war in I could possibly imagine. While several other of Sanderson's stories already earned the moniker of epic fantasy, Stormlight Archive just feels like a different beast. Despite not being as commercially successful as Mistborn is yet, Stormlight Archive absolutely feels like Sanderson's true core project, with the Cosmere in many ways is orbiting around. And it would be a damn shame to get this far into Sanderson's work and bring up Stormlight Archive without giving a massive shout out to Michael Whalen, Brandon Sanderson's cover artist. He has become nearly synonymous with the author, and so much of what he has provided for the Cosmere in terms of artwork is nearly unanimously loved by fans. But from here we take a bit of a step back, and we actually enter the Mistborn world once again, Scalladriel, for Mistborn Era 2. Following a new cast of characters, this return to Mistborn, despite being on a world we're familiar with, feels extraordinarily different from almost anything Sanderson's written, due to the fact that, well, we're in a time of guns, allowing us to see Scalladriel progress forward in time. Alloy of Law was published by Tor and only has just over 96,000 words. The Alloy of Law in Mistborn Era 2 primarily follow the POVs of Wax and Wayne. Instead of taking on a godly lord ruler like we saw in Era 1, Mistborn Era 2 takes a much more down-to-earth approach to these two characters, having them go up against much more down-to-earth stakes, as down-to-earth as you can get in a world where people drink metal for superpowers. I would say my favorite thing about being able to step forward in time within the Mistborn world this way is seeing not only the technology progress in the setting, but also the treatment of the magic system itself and how it has been studied and expounded upon through the same technological progression you see in the world as a whole. It makes it feel so much more real, and it makes you think about how our world would research and explore a magic system if we came across one. Boy, wouldn't that add some spice to life. For those not that interested in the technological angle of Mistborn though, we also had another release taking place in Scalladriel put out in 2011, and this was The 11th Metal, a very, very short story from Sanderson. This is a prequel following two characters from Mistborn Era 1 named Kelsier and Gemmel. Only 6,713 words, The 11th Metal is easiest to find in a collection of short stories within the Cosmere we'll get to in a minute. Now for those of you who like Sanderson sticking to a shorter word count, which I don't blame you, it makes you feel far more accomplished to be able to just bang through all these books, you'll be happy to know that in 2012 he kept the trend going with The Emperor's Soul. Taking place on the world Cell, yes, that one, The Emperor's Soul was actually not put out by Tor and instead Tachyon Productions. At only 31,925 words, The Emperor's Soul follows the POV of Shay, and this is very different from almost any other Cosmere narrative you're going to get out there. It utilizes the shorter page count, as all great novellas do, to just tell an absolutely breakneck paced story that gets you to all the necessary narrative beats without forgetting to craft a great atmosphere. If you like political intrigue and not necessarily getting bogged down in a ton of truly epic fantasy elements, The Emperor's Soul might be the Sanderson book most made for you. And I'm very happy to say I actually discovered a Sanderson story I had no idea existed while researching this video, and that would be one titled Shadows Shadows for Silence in the Forests of Hell, released in 2013. This takes place in the Cosmere world of Threnody? As you follow a character named Silence Montaigne. Coming in at only 17,647 words, I can't really say too much about this because I didn't want to spoil it for myself, so I only gathered the raw details here. Now, some people might be wondering why Sanderson went from having a pretty consistent output up into this point to slowing down and only having these shorter stories be released. Well, this was actually during the time frame where he was chosen to pick up and finish Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time. So his writing output during this time was actually significantly higher than you might think. For The Wheel of Time alone, Sanderson wrote nearly 1 million words. So yeah, there was a lot going on for this author in this moment. And for those of you who did not know that, yes, Brandon Sanderson finished off The Wheel of Time, one of the most successful, highest selling fantasy series of all time. Continuing on from there though, we have the second book in the Stormlight Archive, Words of Radiance, also of course taking place on Roshar, and also of course published by Tor. Coming in at over 403,000 words, released in 2014, this thick book did a lot to help cement the Stormlight Archive as the continued epic the series is going to be, and it brought the Cosmere as a whole into an even larger scope. Now, no more on that, because spoilers. In the same year, we saw Sanderson release Sixth of the Dusk. At only 17,794 words, this Dragonsteel release is definitely still a novella. And in the POV, you're following Six of the Dusk. Yeah, names here are weird. Example, the planet name within the Cosmere is actually titled First of the Sun. But if that strange world was a little too disorienting, how about we step into Scladriel again? Because then we had Allomancer Jack in the Pits of Eltania. This mini Mistborn story is only 7,000 words, and was actually published by Crafty Games, you guessed it, alongside Game. The POV though is Allomancer Jack, which might just be my favorite name in all of Cosmere. Moving on to 2015 releases though, we see Shadows of Self, the second book in the second era of Mistborn. Full-length book, obviously. Coming in at 114,776 words, this was also released by Tor, and of course took place in Scladriel. I won't get into the POV though, because I don't want to confirm who lives or dies from the first book. This was followed up the next year in 2016 by what was thought to be the last book in the second era of Mistborn, but that has since been changed, and that'd be The Bands of Mourning. Coming in at 130,000 words, this one was, as you know, produced by Tor and takes place in Scladriel. But no, again, this is not the end. We are getting the Lost Metal later this year, which will also be in the second era of Mistborn. Keeping Era 1 fans happy though, this year also saw the release of Secret History, which again stepped back into Mistborn Era 1 and gave us a separate angle. I do not want to say anything more to that because massive spoilers, but Secret Histories comes in at 44,981 words, and yes, takes place in Scladriel. Now this next one, I'm not entirely sure how to talk about, so I decided to bring all three entries into one and just get it out of the way, and that would be White Sand. Beginning to be released in 2016, but not finished until 2018, White Sand was a 3-volume graphic novel that has since been combined into an omnibus. Taking place in a new Cosmere world called Talndane, this follows the POV of Kinton, and if you can't tell by the slight hesitation in my voice, I have not read White Sands yet and I'm a bit more insecure covering it, so no spoilers here. Now this graphic novel series was put out by Dynamite Entertainment, and the real confusion comes in with the exact word count, because it being a graphic novel, it's really hard to find an official word count for each volume, but luckily the prose version came out, and that was a solid 206,000 words. So I'm just gonna count that and then do away with the comic book version word count, and I hope that's an okay compromise. Next up we had Edge Dancer, which is another Stormlight entry, taking place, you guessed it, on Roshar. Also released in 2016, this had a word count of 84,329 words. Put out by Tor, it followed the main POV of a character named Lift, as in lift off. Thankfully, the next release is one that makes me recommending how to read a bunch of the short stories that I've talked about before this much easier, because it's not necessarily anything new, but it's accumulation of a lot of the smaller stories Sanderson has written, and that's Arcanum Unbound, which was released in 2016 and is just a collection of shorter Cosmere-related stories. But it being mostly content we've already covered, I'm just gonna walk away from that and instead talk about the very exciting release of the third Stormlight Archive book, Oathbringer. Coming in at an absolutely gargantuan 454,768 words, this was the biggest publication from Sanderson we have gotten yet, and of course, say it with me, it was published by Tor. And it takes place Roshar. It's Roshar. I don't know if that was surprising to you at this point. It's Roshar. But this would be Sanderson's only Cosmere-related release in 2017. Now, the Cosmere would actually experience a bit of a drought here, with Sanderson focusing on other projects. And it wasn't until 2020 that we got Dawnshard, which was put out digitally then, but wasn't released physically until February of 2022. This contained 56,282 words and was also published by Dragonsteel Entertainment. The main POV is a character named Ryzen, and yes, it's on the world of Roshar. But let's get into the next major Stormlight release, because in 2020 we also got Rhythm of War. This is not only Sanderson's biggest Cosmere book to date and the latest Cosmere book release as of recording this video, but it's the longest book we have covered here yet on the breakdown, with one previous episode, but that previous episode was Malazan, so that's saying something. Yes, it was published by Tor. Yes, it takes place in Roshar, and boy oh boy did I have some mixed feelings on this latest entry from the Stormlight archive. Though I have come to like it a bit more as I've gotten further from it. Now, even if you haven't read any of Sanderson's work, you've probably heard of his reputation of being one of the most prolific authors of all time. But after watching this video, you're probably thinking that Cosmere didn't have that many entries. That's because of the number of entries that were not in the Cosmere that happened during this time frame as well. That's not the focus of this video, but here they all are. Yeah, that's in addition to what we're talking about since 2005. And one of my favorite things about the Cosmere, an angle that I find kind of magical, is that you don't really know where the next series of books is going to take you. We could return back into Roshar for a whole other angle, which in fact we know we're going to be getting. We're going to be returning to Mistborn in yet another time jump forward. We're also heading back to Warbreaker and Elantris. Who knows how interconnected they'll all become, what angles to what stories are going to become relevant to other series down the road. It makes it so that any obsessed fan has an infinite amount of things to discuss, of possible implications left, right, up, down, and Sanderson's done a really good job, despite the criticisms many people have had as a quality as an author, in terms of actually maintaining the stories and keeping all these plot threads straight. Summing that all up though, here are the announced projects coming down the road for the Cosmere. But alright, let's get to the conclusion. Just how many words have been in the Cosmere total? Roughly 3,460,000. That is rough due to, again, some conflicting information I saw, but you can be confident it's in the ballpark of this answer. And as I said at the beginning of this video, with Sanderson recently stating that adaptations for his works are on the horizon, it's a really exciting time to not only be a Cosmere fan, but to start being a Cosmere fan. So if you'd like to continue down that path, here's another spoiler-free Cosmere video. But for now, thanks for sticking around and watching me break down the Cosmere. Let me know what angles to this series you'd like to see added into the information provided. Remember, I do have to be wary of spoilers. But anyways, like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. I got books, I got merch, and have a good one, y'all. Remember to check out the Kickstarter for Wraithmark Creative's Iron Prince playmat. And have a good one, y'all. Peace.